Hello friends and family, today I have a short story I would like to share with you. It's called The Ghost in the Room. Let's begin. You know, I swear this old house has more secrets than a politician's closet, said Mark, his eyes glancing around the dusty attic, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. What's got you so spooked? Laura teased, poking her head through a gap in the cardboard boxes, a dusty teddy bear clutched in her hand. It's just a bunch of old junk. Mark rolled his eyes, but the creaking of the floorboards beneath him didn't help his nerves. It's not the stuff that's bothering me, he replied. It's the presence. Laura stepped out from behind the boxes, the teddy bear now forgotten in her grasp. Her playful smile faded at the sight of Mark's genuine concern. What do you mean? It's like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like someone's watching us, Mark admitted, his gaze darting to the shadowy corners of the room. It's been happening more often since we moved in. Laura's smile returned, but this time it was tinged with a hint of unease. You're probably just hearing things because we're up here in the attic, she reasoned, trying to reassure him, but she couldn't ignore the goosebumps that had formed on her arms. Let's get this over with and get out of here, she suggested, placing the teddy bear down with surprising care. They both resumed their search for the Christmas decorations, their eyes scanning the sea of forgotten memories. The attic smelled faintly of mothballs and something else, something stale. Laura tried to push her thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. But as they moved deeper into the room, the feeling of being watched grew more intense. It was as if the shadows themselves had eyes, and they were following her every move. The air grew colder, and Laura shivered, rubbing her arms to generate warmth. Mark paused in his rummaging, looking at her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and tight. Laura nodded, not trusting her voice not to betray her. The creaks and groans of the old house had transformed into a cacophony of whispers and distant footsteps. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. They decided to split up to cover more ground. Laura took the left side of the attic, her heart thudding with every step she took away from Mark. The space seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in around her. As she approached the far corner, a cold breeze brushed her face, carrying with it a scent of decay. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Mark, did you feel that?" she called out, but his voice was lost in the labyrinth of boxes. Laura swallowed her fear and moved closer to the source of the disturbance. The shadows grew denser, as if they were coalescing into something more substantial. Then she saw it. A faint, flickering light, the size of a candle flame, hovering near the floor. Her heart racing, Laura knelt down, extending a trembling hand. The light grew brighter, revealing a small, transparent hand reaching up to meet hers. It was a ghostly child, no more than 7 years old, with wide, terrified eyes and a mouth that opened in a silent scream. Laura gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the box she had been holding. The child's hand vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the code remained. "What is it?" Mark called out, his voice strained with concern. Laura tried to find her voice, but only a whisper emerged. "A ghost," she said, pointing at the spot where the light had been. "A little girl." Mark rushed over, his eyes searching the area with a newfound urgency. The coldness lingered, but the light was gone. He placed a hand on Laura's shoulder, his expression a mix of disbelief and fear. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Laura nodded, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the spot. They decided to leave the attic and tell their parents about what had happened. As they descended the creaky stairs, the atmosphere grew lighter, the whispers of the house fading into the background. In the safety of their room, Laura recounted her encounter to her mother, who listened with a furrowed brow. "I've never heard of anything like that in this house," she said, clearly troubled. "But we should look into it." That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The image of the ghostly child was etched into her mind, her silent scream echoing in Laura's thoughts. The darkness of the room felt thick and suffocating, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see the flicker of spectral light. Mark, noticing her unease, offered to stay in her room. They spent the evening huddled under a blanket fort, whispering about ghost stories and theories. Laura's mother had suggested it might be the spirit of a child who had once lived in the house, possibly lost or trapped. The more they talked, the less scared Laura felt. The girl didn't seem malevolent, just scared. They decided that they would try to communicate with her the next time she appeared. Days went by, with no sign of the ghostly presence, and Laura began to think it had been a figment of her imagination. But then, one evening, as she sat in her room reading, the air grew cold again. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the flicker of light in the corner of her eye. Slowly, she turned her head, and there it was, the same transparent hand, reaching out from the shadow. This time, Laura didn't call for Mark. She took a deep breath and approached the hand, her own trembling slightly. The cold grew more intense as she reached out, and she felt a strange tingle as her flesh touched the icy touch of the spirit world. The hand clasped hers firmly, and she felt a sudden rush of emotion, fear, sadness, and a longing so profound it made her chest ache. The hand began to pull her gently towards the attic door. Laura took a tentative step, then another, allowing the spirit to lead her. Mark looked up from his book, his eyes wide when he saw Laura being guided by an unseen force. He leapt to his feet, his heart thudding in his chest. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "It's the little girl," Laura managed to reply, her eyes never leaving the hand. "I think she wants to show us something." They followed the glowing hand up the stairs and into the attic, their steps measured and cautious. The attic was as they had left it, but now it felt eerie, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. The hand led them to the spot where Laura had first seen the girl, and there, among the dust and cobwebs, lay an old, worn-out diary. Laura picked it up gingerly, feeling the chill radiating from its pages. They sat cross-legged on the floor, the diary between them, and Mark held the flashlight as Laura carefully turned the brittle pages. The handwriting was small and neat. The entries dated back to the 1950s. The diary belonged to a girl named Emily, who had lived in their house. The entries spoke of her loneliness, her love for her dolls, and her fear of the monsters in the shadows. Laura felt a pang of sympathy as she read about Emily's isolation, her voice trembling as she shared the words with Mark. The diary grew more somber, describing a fateful night when Emily had snuck out of her room to find her parents, only to get lost in the attic. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she read Emily's final entry, detailing her panic and desperation as she called for help that never came. The hand grew colder, squeezing Laura's in a silent plea for understanding. It dawned on them that the girl had never made it out of the attic alive. Mark's grip tightened around the flashlight, casting stark shadows across the page. "We need to help her," he said firmly, his voice cracking the silence. Laura nodded, wiping away the tears that had spilled onto the diary. They decided to conduct a small, respectful ceremony to honor Emily, hoping it would bring her the peace she had been denied. They gathered their parents, who were equally disturbed by the discovery. Laura's mother held a small bouquet of flowers, they had picked from the garden, while their father held a candle to light the way. Mark found an old photo album and a few of Emily's favorite toys that seemed to have been left behind. Together, they climbed the stairs to the attic, the air thick with anticipation and sadness. The hand led them to the same spot where Laura had first seen the ghostly apparition. The cold had intensified, and the whispers grew to a murmur, almost as if the house itself was mourning. Laura cleared her throat and spoke softly, her voice shaking slightly. "Emily, we found your diary. We know what happened to you. You're not alone anymore." The hand grew warmer, and the murmurs grew quieter. Laura felt a gentle pressure on her shoulder, and when she looked up, she saw the transparent outline of the little girl standing before them, her eyes filled with unshed tears. They set up the items they had brought with them, the candle, the toys, and the flowers, creating a small, makeshift shrine. Laura's mother lit the candle, and the warm light flickered over the room, casting a gentle glow on the child's translucent form. The air grew less oppressive, and Laura could feel a sense of peace begin to seep into the attic. They all sat in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded decades ago. Laura took a deep breath and began to read from the diary, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. The words brought Emily's short life into stark relief, her innocence and fear palpable in every line. The diary entries spoke of a girl desperate for companionship, whose only solace was her imagination. Laura paused often, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she recounted Emily's tales of adventure and her pleas for someone to find her. Mark sat beside her, his hand resting protectively on her back, the flashlight beam trembling slightly. As Laura finished reading the last page, the coldness in the air began to dissipate, and the whispers grew to a gentle, soothing hum. The ghostly hand grew warmer in Laura's grasp, and she could feel the weight of it as if it were corporeal. The outline of the child grew clearer, her transparent form now suffused with a soft glow that seemed to emanate from the pages of the diary. Emily looked up at Laura with a hint of a smile, the sadness in her eyes slowly fading. Laura felt the tension in her own body release as she squeezed the ghostly hand back. "We're your friends now," she whispered. "You're not alone." The ghostly child nodded, and the light grew stronger, surrounding her. Laura and Mark watched in awe as the air shimmered and the whispers grew into a harmonious chorus. The shadows retreated, and the attic felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted from its very foundation. "Thank you for your time. God bless."